At 9:47 p.m., under a cold Pittsburgh rain, Christina Morris tightened the faded blue shoelace wrapped around her worn sneaker before lifting her 10-year-old son onto her back. Noah's crutches knocked softly against her legs as she climbed another steep flight of cracked concrete steps toward the apartment they barely called home. Halfway up, her knees buckled for just a second. A black SUV stopped without a sound. The man who stepped out didn't reach for his wallet. He stared at the blue knot on her shoe, then quietly asked, "May I walk with you?" That single question changed 3 lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. We'd love to know. And if stories about courage, kindness, and second chances mean something to you, consider subscribing and joining us for more journeys like this. Every weekday began at exactly 5:15 a.m., long before the first hint of sunlight reached the brick buildings that climbed the hills of Pittsburgh's Beltshoover neighborhood. Christina Morris never needed an alarm anymore. Years of responsibility had trained her body to wake before the clock could speak. She sat up quietly on the old pull-out couch that served as her bed, careful not to let its tired springs squeak. The one-bedroom apartment was barely 600 square feet, but she had arranged every corner with purpose. Noah's twin bed stood beside the window, where he could watch the stars on clear nights. A folding table became both a dining room and a homework desk. Plastic bins tucked beneath the couch held winter blankets, extra clothes, and carefully organized medical supplies. Luxury had never lived there. Love had. Christina pulled on a gray sweatshirt and slipped her feet into the same faded sneakers she had owned for nearly 4 years. Before tying them, she paused for a familiar ritual. The left shoelace had snapped almost a year earlier. Instead of replacing both shoes, she had tied the broken lace together with a bright blue cord taken from Noah's old art supply bag. The knot was small, uneven, and impossible to miss. She tugged it twice to make sure it still held. "As long as the knot holds," she whispered with a sleepy smile. "So do we," Noah answered from across the room without even opening his eyes. She laughed softly. "You were supposed to be asleep." "I was. Then I smelled pancakes." "They're not pancakes. They're trying to be. They're budget pancakes. Those are my favorite." Their laughter filled the apartment more completely than expensive furniture ever could. Breakfast consisted of 2 small pancakes made from a mix she stretched with mashed bananas, 1 scrambled egg split between them, and a mug of warm milk for Noah, while Christina settled for coffee diluted with extra water. She never complained. Noah noticed anyway. Without saying anything, he quietly slid half his pancake onto her plate. She pretended not to notice until he looked away. Then she slid it back. He frowned. "You need it." "So do you." "I'm growing." "I'm growing older. You always win." "I've had more practice." They smiled at each other, the kind of smile shared by people who had survived enough difficult mornings to treasure the ordinary ones. After breakfast, Christina helped Noah through the routine they could perform almost without words: his leg braces, his backpack, his sketchbook, his favorite blue pencil tucked carefully into the front pocket. The sketchbook never left his side. While other children filled notebooks with superheroes or race cars, Noah drew cities. Not famous skylines, not giant buildings. He drew sidewalks, ramps, bus stops, crosswalks, benches placed exactly where tired people might need to rest. He believed every road should help someone get home. Christina had once asked why he spent so much time drawing sidewalks instead of skyscrapers. He had shrugged. "People remember the buildings. And they forget the walk." She never forgot those words. At 6:40, they left the apartment. Helen Brooks, the elderly widow across the hallway, was already watering the 2 stubborn plants outside her door. "Morning, sweetheart," Helen called. Morning, Miss Helen. And good morning to my favorite architect. Noah grinned. I'm still practicing. The best ones never stop. Helen reached into her sweater pocket and produced 2 wrapped peppermints. One for Noah, one for Christina. I know it's early, she said, but everyone deserves something sweet before facing the world. Christina accepted them with genuine gratitude. Helen never offered charity, only kindness. That difference meant everything. Outside, the October air carried the sharp scent of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. Marcus Bell was already waiting behind the wheel of Route 51. He spotted them from half a block away. I was beginning to think you'd traded me for another driver, he joked as he lowered the bus ramp. No chance. You say that now. You let us on when everyone else says they're behind schedule. Marcus smiled. I've learned something over 23 years driving buses. What's that? The schedule matters. And people matter more. Noah gave him a fist bump before settling into the wheelchair area. Marcus never rushed them. Not once. When Christina thanked him, he always answered the same way. One day somebody will do the same for my family. She hoped he was right. After Noah arrived at school, Christina headed home for a few precious hours of sleep before preparing for another evening shift at St. Anne Medical Center. The hospital laundry department was hidden deep in the basement where patients rarely ventured. The work was hot, heavy, repetitive. Industrial washers thundered all day, and enormous dryers filled the air with constant heat. Most people forgot the department existed until clean sheets failed to appear. Emily Carter, the evening supervisor, appreciated Christina more than almost anyone. You've never missed a shift, Emily said one afternoon while reviewing schedules. I've been close. But you never did. Christina shrugged. There are families depending on those linens. Emily looked at her with quiet admiration. You always think about someone else first. Christina smiled faintly. I know what it feels like when nobody does. Emily wanted to ask more. She never did. Respect sometimes meant leaving silence untouched. As evening settled over Pittsburgh, Christina changed into her Navy work uniform and slipped her old sneakers back on. Once again, before walking out the employee entrance, she bent down and checked the blue knot. Still holding, still strong. Her phone vibrated. A notification appeared from the city's accessible transportation service. Service alert. Your scheduled pickup for 9:10 p.m. has been canceled due to driver shortages. We apologize for the inconvenience. Christina stared at the screen. No surprise, no anger, just exhaustion. She quietly folded the phone into her pocket before anyone could see her expression change. Across town, Noah finished another drawing. This one showed a mother carrying her child across a bridge, while tiny blue knots connected every broken path. He smiled to himself, because in his mind, every broken road could still be tied back together. He just didn't know that before another week had passed, someone else would finally notice the same blue knot that had carried hope through every impossible day. By the end of October, Christina Morris could measure time not by dates on a calendar, but by how many evenings the accessible shuttle failed to arrive. 6 cancellations, then 8, then 11. Each text message looked almost identical. We apologize for the inconvenience. The words became strangely hollow. Apologies did not shorten hills. They did not ease aching shoulders. They certainly did not carry a growing 10-year-old boy home after a 12-hour day. At 8:56 every evening, Christina clocked out of the laundry department. She changed from her hospital uniform into a faded burgundy hoodie, washed the scent of detergent from her hands as best she could, and hurried toward the bus stop before Marcus Bell's Route 51 pulled away. The timing had become a carefully balanced equation. Miss the bus by 1 minute, and the next one would come nearly 40 minutes later. 40 minutes meant Noah would be waiting alone outside the after-school community center. That was never an option. Emily Carter often watched Christina rush through the employee entrance. "You don't have to run every night," she called once. Christina smiled over her shoulder. "I know. But you always do." "My son's waiting." Emily understood there was nothing more to say. Every parent in the building recognized that tone. One damp Tuesday evening, Christina reached the stop just as Marcus opened the doors. "You made it," he said with a relieved grin. "Barely. I was about to get myself in trouble waiting." "You've already done enough." Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am." He lowered his voice. "I've only done what's decent." During the ride, Noah leaned against the window sketchbook, balanced across his knees. Streetlights streaked across the glass like golden stars. "What are you drawing tonight?" Marcus asked through the mirror. "A better bus stop." Marcus chuckled. "This one isn't good enough. It doesn't have a bench." "We've got seats." "No," Noah smiled politely. "I mean for people waiting after you leave." Marcus grew quiet. He had driven those streets for decades. He had never thought about the people left behind. The bus reached its final stop just after 9:30. Marcus lowered the ramp. "Take care of yourselves." "We always do," Christina answered. But as soon as the bus disappeared around the corner, the silence settled over them. The neighborhood changed after dark. Storefronts were closed, streetlights flickered, traffic became sparse. The walk home stretched almost 2 miles uphill. Christina knelt beside Noah. "You ready, Captain?" He nodded. "I'm getting heavier." "You've said that every week." "Because I am." She smiled while helping him onto her back. "So I'll get stronger," his arms wrapped gently around her shoulders. She stood slowly. The first few steps were always the easiest. The last 1,000 were another story. Halfway up the first hill, Noah whispered, "Your shoulder hurts again." "It always hurts." "No." He rested his chin against her shoulder. "It hurts differently." Christina didn't answer immediately. Children noticed truths adults often tried to hide. "It's nothing I can't handle." "You always say that." "Because it's true." She shifted his weight carefully before continuing. On the next block, a young couple walked toward them carrying grocery bags. The woman glanced at Christina. For a moment, it seemed she might offer help. Instead, she lowered her eyes and kept walking. Christina didn't blame her. Most people weren't cruel. They were simply unsure. Unsure became silence. Silence became habit. Habit became a city full of strangers passing one another every day. A few minutes later, they reached a long staircase that climbed between 2 aging apartment buildings. 37 concrete steps. Noah knew because he had counted them hundreds of times. "You want to rest first?" he asked. Christina looked upward. "If I stop now, you won't want to start again." "Exactly." She climbed. 1, 2, 3. By step 15, her breathing had deepened. By 23, sweat gathered beneath her hoodie despite the cold air. At 31, she paused for barely 3 seconds. Noah touched the blue knot on her sneaker. It stayed. It always does. As long as the knot holds. So do we. The words sounded almost like prayer now. At the top of the stairs, Helen Brooks was walking her tiny beagle. She hurried over. "Lord Child, let me at least carry his backpack." Christina hesitated. Then she handed it over. "Thank you." Helen smiled warmly. "See?" "What?" "The world doesn't end when someone carries one small thing." Christina looked down for a moment. "I guess not." Helen walked beside them for the last block. No grand speeches, no pity, just company. Sometimes that was enough. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Christina sat alone at the folding table with a heating pad draped across her right shoulder. She carefully opened a notebook. Inside were columns of numbers, Rent, electricity, medication, bus fare, groceries. Every dollar already belonged somewhere before it arrived. She circled one expense 3 different times. New shoes, estimated cost $68. She closed the notebook. Not this month. She looked toward the doorway where her worn sneakers rested. The blue knot had faded from bright cobalt to a dusty gray blue. She remembered the afternoon Noah had found the cord inside his old art kit. Blue means hope, he had insisted. She wasn't sure where he'd learned that. Maybe he'd invented it. Children often created truths adults needed. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the transportation service. Due to continued staffing shortages, tomorrow's evening pickup may also experience delays or cancellation. She read it once, then locked the screen. Tomorrow would take care of itself. She walked quietly to Noah's bed. Moonlight spilled through the window onto the sketchbook lying open beside him. A fresh drawing filled the page. It showed a steep hill, a small mother carrying a child. Behind them, dozens of empty cars drove past, except one. One black vehicle had stopped. The driver stood outside, not reaching toward them, simply walking beside them. Christina frowned slightly. She had never told Noah about wishing someone would simply stay for a while. She gently closed the sketchbook and kissed his forehead. Outside, rain clouds gathered again over Pittsburgh. Somewhere across the city, another long workday was ending for a man whose life seemed impossibly different from hers. Within days, those two roads, one paved with privilege, the other with perseverance, would finally cross beneath the same cold October sky. On paper, Daniel Whitmore had everything people spent their entire lives chasing. At 58, he was the founder and chairman of Whitmore Urban Development, one of Pennsylvania's most respected construction and infrastructure companies. His projects had transformed neglected riverfronts into thriving neighborhoods, restored abandoned train stations into cultural landmarks, and built office towers that reflected the changing skyline of Pittsburgh. Business magazines called him a visionary. Television hosts described him as a self-made billionaire. University students studied his career in entrepreneurship courses. Yet every evening when the interviews ended and the applause faded, Daniel drove home alone. His penthouse overlooked the confluence of Pittsburgh's 3 rivers. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed breathtaking views of bridges sparkling against the night sky. Original paintings hung on white walls. Shelves displayed awards from governors, business associations, and charitable foundations. Visitors often admired how peaceful the apartment felt. Daniel thought it felt unbearably quiet. His housekeeper left every afternoon at 5. His chef prepared meals that were usually untouched. Most nights, Daniel ate a simple bowl of soup standing at the kitchen counter before returning to work. Not because he needed more money, because silence was easier to survive when he stayed busy. That Thursday morning began like dozens before it. At 8:00 a.m., he entered the executive conference room, where 12 senior executives were already waiting. Ryan Collins, the company's chief financial officer, clicked through a presentation filled with colorful charts. "Our third-quarter profits exceeded projections by 11%, Ryan announced confidently. "The Riverside commercial expansion remains ahead of schedule, and the East Liberty redevelopment has attracted 3 new investors." Polite applause circled the room. Ryan smiled. "One more successful quarter and we'll surpass every forecast." Everyone looked toward Daniel, expecting satisfaction. Instead, he simply nodded. "Good work." Ryan frowned slightly. He had hoped for more enthusiasm. After the meeting ended, Sophia Reed caught up with Daniel in the hallway. At 32, Sophia had become one of the company's brightest architects. Unlike many executives, she still spent time walking construction sites instead of studying them only through reports. "You seemed distracted," she observed. "I was listening." "You were somewhere else." Daniel smiled faintly. "You've become very good at reading people." I learned from watching you. He glanced toward the large window overlooking downtown. Tell me something, Sophia. Anything. When was the last time we built something that changed a life instead of increasing property values? Sophia didn't answer immediately. She knew he wasn't criticizing the company. He was questioning himself. I think, she finally said, those aren't always different things. No. Daniel shook his head gently. But sometimes they are. The conversation lingered in Sophia's mind long after he walked away. She had worked beside Daniel for 6 years. Lately, he seemed haunted by questions no financial report could answer. That afternoon, Daniel canceled 2 interviews and left the office earlier than usual. Instead of driving home, he crossed one of Pittsburgh's many bridges and parked beside a quiet overlook. He often came there when memories became too loud. The river below moved with calm certainty. It reminded him of another autumn, nearly 50 years earlier. Back then, there had been no luxury apartment, no successful company, no expensive suit, only a tiny rental house where his mother worked 2 jobs and still struggled to pay bills. And there had been Grace, his little sister. Grace Whitmore had been born with a severe spinal condition. She used a wheelchair long before schools, sidewalks, or public buildings were designed with accessibility in mind. Every trip outside became an obstacle course, curbs without ramps, broken sidewalks, narrow doorways, steep staircases. Daniel was only 13, but he remembered lifting the front wheels of Grace's wheelchair over cracked pavement while pretending it wasn't difficult. Their mother always apologized. I'm sorry this world makes you work so hard. Grace would laugh. It isn't the world. What is it? It just hasn't learned yet. Those words had stayed with Daniel long after everything else faded. Grace rarely complained. Instead, she dreamed. She loved drawing neighborhoods where every child could reach every playground. She imagined libraries without steps, schools with wide doors, parks where nobody felt different. One rainy November afternoon, their mother had tried carrying Grace up the stairs to their apartment after the wheelchair became stuck in deep mud. She slipped. Neither of them was seriously injured. But the fear in their mother's eyes never left Daniel. 3 years later, Grace died from complications unrelated to her disability. Daniel was 16. At the funeral, he silently promised himself that if he ever built anything, he would build places Grace would have loved. Life, however, had a way of changing promises into ambitions. He started a business, worked relentlessly, succeeded beyond imagination, projects multiplied, employees numbered in the thousands. Somewhere along the journey, deadlines replaced dreams. Profit margins quietly pushed memories aside. Not intentionally, just gradually. The sound of his phone interrupted the silence. Ryan Collins. Daniel answered. The investors loved today's presentation, Ryan said. I'm glad. I've scheduled dinner with the board tonight. Daniel looked at the river. I won't make it. A brief pause. Everything all right? I'm just taking the long way home. After ending the call, Daniel remained by the overlook until dusk painted the sky orange and purple. Finally, he climbed into his black SUV. Rain began as a light mist. Traffic moved steadily through the city. Without thinking, Daniel ignored his usual route and followed unfamiliar streets winding through older neighborhoods. He noticed worn apartment buildings, empty storefronts, bus shelters with cracked glass, children waiting beneath flickering streetlights. Parts of Pittsburgh he had not visited in years. At one intersection, construction barriers narrowed the road. Traffic slowed. Daniel glanced toward the sidewalk. A city bus had just pulled away. Several people dispersed in different directions. Then his eyes settled on one figure. A woman bent slightly, helping a young boy climb onto her back with practiced care. His crutches swung gently against her legs. Before taking her first step uphill, she crouched for a brief moment and tightened something on her left shoe. Even from inside his vehicle, Daniel noticed the faded blue knot. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. For an instant, the years disappeared. He wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was seeing his own mother, standing in the rain preparing to carry Grace home because there was simply no other way. The traffic light turned green. Cars behind him began moving. Daniel didn't. He kept watching as the woman adjusted the boy's weight and started climbing the steep hill alone. Something deep inside him, something buried beneath decades of success. Schedules and board meetings stirred awake for the first time in years. Without fully understanding why, he switched on his hazard lights and slowly pulled his SUV to the side of the road. Rain tapped softly against the roof of Daniel Whitmore's SUV as he sat motionless for several seconds. Cars slipped around him, their headlights stretching across the wet pavement before disappearing into the darkness. Someone behind him honked impatiently. He barely heard it. His eyes remained fixed on the woman climbing the hill. She wasn't rushing. She couldn't. Every few steps, she adjusted the little boy's weight without setting him down, as though she had repeated the same movement hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Daniel switched off the engine. He stepped into the cold rain without reaching for the umbrella folded inside the passenger door. The distance between them was no more than 30 yards, yet he walked slowly, careful not to startle her. Christina heard footsteps behind her before she saw him. Her shoulders stiffened. She instinctively shifted Noah slightly higher on her back and turned just enough to keep both the stranger and her son in view. Daniel stopped several feet away. He kept his hands where she could see them. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I don't mean to frighten you." Christina studied him for a moment. Expensive overcoat, polished leather shoes, silver hair dampened by rain. Everything about him suggested a man who belonged somewhere else. "We're fine," she answered politely. "I wasn't sure." "We'll make it home." Daniel nodded. "I believe you will." The silence lingered. He realized she was waiting for him to leave. Instead, he spoke again. "My name is Daniel." She hesitated. "Christina." She didn't offer her last name. Neither would he have if their positions had been reversed. He looked toward Noah, whose curious brown eyes had been quietly studying him. "And what's your name?" "Noah." "It's nice to meet you, Noah." "You too." Daniel smiled. "You've got a firm handshake." "I'm practicing for when I'm taller." Daniel laughed softly. "I like that plan." Christina shifted Noah again. "We should keep moving." "Of course." Daniel glanced toward his SUV. "I could drive you home?" The answer came immediately. "Thank you." A brief pause. "But no." There was no bitterness in her voice, no suspicion, just quiet certainty. Daniel respected it. "I understand." Most people would have insisted. They would have repeated the offer, explained their good intentions. Daniel did none of those things. Instead, he asked something entirely different. "Would you mind if I walked with you?" Christina blinked. "You don't have to." "I know. It'll take a while. I have time." She looked at him carefully. People who wanted something usually hurried. This man seemed strangely comfortable waiting. Finally, she gave a small nod. "If you don't mind getting wet." Daniel smiled. "I've been caught in worse storms." They continued uphill together. For the first minute, no one spoke. Only the sound of rain, shoes against damp pavement, Noah's crutches tapping lightly against Christina's leg. Daniel noticed how often Christina adjusted her balance. She never complained, never sighed. She simply adapted. After another block, Noah broke the silence. "You have a nice car." Daniel looked at him. Thank you. My mom says cars don't tell you if someone's kind. They don't. They just tell you someone can afford a nice car. Daniel laughed. Your mom sounds wise. She is. Christina rolled her eyes playfully. He talks more than I do. I can tell. Another few yards passed. Daniel looked toward the sketchbook sticking out of Noah's backpack. You like drawing? I love drawing. What do you draw? Cities. What kind of cities? The kind where my mom doesn't have to carry me. The words landed with astonishing gentleness. No accusation, no self-pity, just honesty. Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. What would that city look like? He asked. Noah's eyes brightened immediately. There'd be ramps everywhere. Daniel nodded. Good idea. And bus stops with roofs. Very practical. And benches. So people can rest. So caregivers can rest. Daniel glanced at Christina. She was staring straight ahead, pretending not to hear. Pretending because hearing it aloud hurt too much. They reached another steep staircase. 37 cracked concrete steps climbed between aging brick buildings. Christina stopped at the bottom. She took one slow breath. Then another. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. May I carry his backpack? She almost refused. The answer formed automatically. But before speaking, she noticed Noah looking at her, not pleading, simply waiting. She slowly slipped the backpack from her shoulder. Just the backpack. Daniel accepted it with both hands. It feels heavier than it looks. Noah grinned. That's because of the sketchbooks. More than one. I don't like running out of paper. Daniel chuckled. Neither do I. They started climbing, step by step. Halfway up, Christina's breathing became noticeably heavier. Daniel wanted to offer more help. He didn't. She had trusted him with one small thing. Trust deserved patience. At the top of the stairs, Christina finally paused. She carefully lowered Noah onto a nearby bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she stretched her shoulders. Daniel quietly set the backpack beside Noah. You do this every night? He asked. She nodded. Almost. In every kind of weather. We don't really get to choose the weather. Daniel looked down the hill they had just climbed. It suddenly felt much steeper than it had from inside his SUV. I'm sorry, he said before thinking. Christina looked surprised. For what? For never noticing. She studied his face. There was no performance in his expression, no rehearsed sympathy, only regret. You couldn't notice someone you'd never met. Maybe. Daniel looked around the quiet neighborhood. But I should have noticed a city where this was possible. Christina followed his gaze. It's not just one city. No, she shook her head gently. It's easy to overlook people when they're still managing. The sentence stayed with Daniel, still managing. Society often measured suffering by collapse. As long as someone kept going, everyone assumed they were fine. Noah suddenly pointed upward. The clouds are breaking. Daniel looked. A narrow opening had appeared between the dark clouds. Several stars were beginning to peek through. My favorite one should be out soon, Noah whispered. You know their names? Daniel asked. Most of them. Why stars? Noah smiled. They help people find their way home. Daniel's eyes drifted from the sky back to Christina. Maybe that was what she had been doing all along, finding the way home, every single night, one impossible step at a time. When they finally reached the entrance of the old apartment building, Christina turned toward him. This is us. Daniel handed Noah the backpack. Thank you for letting me carry it. It wasn't much. It mattered. Christina extended her hand. Thank you for walking with us. Daniel shook it. I should be thanking you. She looked puzzled. For what? For reminding me what I've been driving past. Neither of them fully understood the weight of those words. As Christina and Noah disappeared through the worn front door, Daniel remained standing on the sidewalk. Rain had almost stopped. The blue knot on Christina's left shoe was the last thing he saw before the door closed. He didn't know her address. He didn't know where she worked. He didn't know anything about her life. But as he walked back toward his SUV, he realized something with absolute certainty. Tomorrow night he would come back. Not because he believed he could rescue her, but because for the first time in years there was somewhere he felt he needed to be. The next evening, Daniel Whitmore left the office at 8:15. Ryan Collins noticed immediately. "You've got dinner with the investors." "I've canceled." Ryan stared at him. "Canceled?" "They'll survive one evening without me. The investors won't appreciate that." Daniel buttoned his overcoat. "Then tomorrow I'll give them something worth appreciating." Ryan opened his mouth as if to argue, but Daniel was already walking toward the elevator. For nearly 30 years, his life had revolved around meetings scheduled months in advance. Every hour had a purpose, every minute accounted for. Now he found himself driving toward a neighborhood that had never appeared on his calendar. He arrived at the familiar intersection 15 minutes before Route 51 usually reached its final stop. Instead of waiting inside the SUV, he stood beneath the small bus shelter, hands in his coat pockets, watching people come and go. An elderly man carrying groceries, a teenage girl with headphones, a nurse still wearing hospital scrubs. Each hurried home without noticing the others. Daniel wondered how many stories crossed this sidewalk every day without ever being seen. At exactly 9:31, the familiar city bus rolled to a stop. Marcus Bell lowered the ramp. He noticed Daniel immediately. "You waiting for someone?" Marcus asked through the open door. "I think so." Marcus smiled politely. "I hope they don't keep you waiting." "They've already waited much longer than I have." Marcus looked puzzled, but simply nodded. Then Christina appeared behind the other passengers. She looked genuinely surprised. "You came back." Daniel smiled. "I said I had time." She looked toward the black SUV parked across the street. "You really drove all the way here?" "I did." "You don't have to keep doing this." "I know." There was that answer again. Not obligation, choice. Noah rolled forward using his crutches until he reached Daniel. "I knew you'd come." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You did. You looked like someone who finishes things." Daniel laughed softly. "I hope you're right." Marcus watched the exchange from the driver's seat before closing the bus doors. As the bus pulled away, he glanced once more in his mirror. 3 figures remained beneath the streetlight. One carrying nothing, one carrying far too much, one too young to realize he was quietly changing both adults. The walk began almost naturally this time. Daniel reached for Noah's backpack before anyone asked. Christina noticed. "You remembered." "I remembered your shoulders looked tired." She handed it to him without protest. Trust, she realized, wasn't built through grand gestures. Sometimes it was built by remembering one small detail from yesterday. The night air carried the smell of damp earth after the previous day's rain. For a while, Noah entertained them by pointing out unusual cloud shapes. "That one looks like a turtle." Daniel looked upward. "I was going to say elephant." "No," Noah laughed. "Too slow." "I thought turtles were slow." "They're faster than elephants climbing hills." Christina shook her head. "Where do you come up with these things?" "My brain," Daniel grinned. "It seems like a very busy place." "It never sleeps." "I believe that." As they reached the first incline, Daniel noticed Christina flexing her fingers. Her right hand opened and closed repeatedly. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. She glanced down. "My shoulder gets stiff." "Have you seen a doctor?" She hesitated. Doctors cost money. You work at a hospital. I wash sheets. Daniel fell silent. For years he had donated millions to medical research. Yet somehow he had never considered the woman cleaning hospital linens might not be able to afford treatment herself. The realization unsettled him. Noah broke the silence. My mom says shoulders heal. Christina smiled faintly. I said they usually do. You left out usually. I didn't want you worrying. I worry anyway. Daniel watched them exchange the familiar conversation. There was remarkable honesty between them. No pretending everything was perfect. Only small edits to soften difficult truths. Halfway up the hill, they passed a convenience store. The owner, Mr. Patel, stepped outside carrying a mop. Evening, Christina. Evening. He noticed Daniel. Friend of yours? Christina answered before thinking. I guess so. The words surprised even her. Daniel heard them too. Friend, not stranger, not billionaire, not businessman, just friend. Mr. Patel smiled warmly. Good, everybody deserves one. He returned inside before anyone could respond. The sentence lingered long after the door closed. Further uphill, they reached the familiar staircase. This time Daniel looked carefully at every cracked step. Some tilted forward. Others had broken edges. Rainwater collected in shallow depressions. This can't be safe, he murmured. It isn't, Christina replied. So why hasn't the city repaired it? She gave a tired smile. Probably because nobody important climbs these stairs. Daniel looked around. Children lived here. Older adults lived here. People in wheelchairs avoided this route entirely. How had that become unimportant? Near the top, Noah suddenly stopped. Wait, Christina froze immediately. What's wrong? I forgot something. Daniel looked concerned. What? My notebook. Christina's face fell. We left it on the bus. Noah searched inside the backpack. No? His expression changed. He slowly pulled out the sketchbook. I just wanted to show him. Daniel smiled with relief. You scared us. Noah opened to a fresh drawing. It showed the same staircase they were climbing. Except in the drawing, the broken steps had become a gentle ramp, winding through gardens filled with flowers. Small benches lined the path. Children walked beside older people. Parents pushed strollers. Wheelchairs rolled freely. Nobody looked separated from anyone else. Daniel studied the page for a long moment. You drew this from memory? Noah nodded proudly. I improve it every week. Daniel pointed toward a small figure standing beside the path. Who's that? The person who checks if everybody gets home. Daniel looked closer. The figure wasn't wearing a cape, or a uniform, or a suit, just ordinary clothes. He doesn't build the road, Daniel asked. No. What does he do? He stays until everybody's safe. Daniel felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Children had an astonishing ability to describe heroism without making it sound heroic. When they finally reached the apartment building, Christina unlocked the front entrance. Before stepping inside, she turned back toward Daniel. You've walked us home twice now. I have. Why? The question hung quietly between them. Daniel considered several answers. Because of grace. Because of guilt. Because of regret. None felt complete. Finally, he said, for a long time I believed changing the world meant building bigger things. He looked at the worn staircase behind them. I'm starting to think it begins by walking one person home. Christina didn't know how to respond, so she simply smiled. It was the first completely unguarded smile Daniel had seen from her. As the apartment door closed behind Christina and Noah, Daniel remained outside once again. This time he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked slowly up and down the street, studying every curb, every broken sidewalk, every missing ramp and faded bus stop. He was no longer seeing a neighborhood. He was seeing a blueprint. And for the first time in decades, Daniel Whitmore knew exactly what he needed to build next. The first warning came on a Monday morning. Christina almost dropped a stack of freshly folded surgical blankets when a sharp pain shot from her right shoulder down to her fingertips. She caught the linens before they touched the floor. No one noticed. Or perhaps everyone was too busy pretending not to. She took a slow breath, rolled her shoulder once, and returned to work. Pain had become another part of the schedule. Wake up, make breakfast, help Noah, sleep for a few hours, work, carry Noah home, ice her shoulder, repeat. At 7:45 that evening, Emily Carter found Christina rubbing her arm beside one of the industrial dryers. "You've been hiding that for weeks." "I'm fine," Emily crossed her arms. "I've known you long enough to recognize when you're lying." Christina smiled apologetically. "I'm managing." Emily sighed. Managing isn't the same as healing. She reached into a drawer and handed Christina a small tube of pain relief cream. "It isn't much. I can't let you—" "You aren't." Emily gently placed it in Christina's hand. "I'm not giving it to an employee." She smiled. "I'm giving it to a mother." Christina looked down at the tube for several seconds before quietly whispering, "Thank you." Emily hesitated before speaking again. "I need to tell you something difficult." Christina looked up. "The hospital is changing shift procedures next month." "What kind of changes?" "Anyone clocking in late more than 3 times in 30 days will receive a formal warning." Christina felt her stomach tighten. "I've never been late." "I know." Emily's voice softened. "But you've come close. More than once." Christina understood immediately. If a bus ran behind schedule, if Noah's transportation was canceled, if she stumbled on those steep stairs, a few minutes could cost her the job. "I'll figure it out," she said quietly. Emily wished she believed that. "So will I," she answered, though she wasn't sure how. That night, Christina smiled as usual when she met Noah outside the community center. He immediately noticed something different. "You didn't wave." "I forgot." "You never forget." She forced a brighter smile. "There. Better?" Children often accepted smiles. They almost never believed them. Marcus Bell greeted them with his usual warmth, but he noticed Christina gripping the overhead rail with her left hand instead of her right. "You all right?" "Just tired." Marcus looked at her shoulder. "You ought to let somebody help you once in a while." Christina laughed gently. "I do." When people insist." Marcus smiled. "I've noticed you're getting better at that." At the final stop, Daniel was already waiting. Noah's face lit up. "You beat us." "I had a head start." Daniel accepted the backpack before Christina could even remove it. "I've become predictable," he joked. "That's not always a bad thing," Christina replied. They started walking. About halfway to the staircase, Daniel noticed Christina stumble almost imperceptibly. She recovered immediately. Most people wouldn't have seen it. He did. "Let's take a break." "I'm okay." "I didn't ask if you were." She looked at him. "I said let's take a break." No pity, no command, just concern. For the first time, Christina allowed herself to sit on one of the old benches lining the sidewalk. Noah settled beside her. Daniel remained standing nearby, pretending to admire the view of the city lights. He wanted to give her dignity, not attention. After a minute, Noah quietly asked, "Mom." "Yes." "Does your shoulder hurt because of me?" The question stopped time. Christina turned toward him immediately. "No." "You always say no." "Because it's true." "No." His voice trembled. "It hurts because you carry me." Christina gently took his hand. "It hurts because life is heavy sometimes." He lowered his eyes. "If I could walk better." She interrupted him softly. If I could fly, we wouldn't need stairs. That earned a tiny smile. We don't get to choose everything. What do we choose? We choose how we love each other. Daniel looked away toward the street. The conversation wasn't meant for him, yet it reached him all the same. He remembered being 14 years old, hearing his own mother whisper nearly identical words to Grace. "We can't choose the hill," she had said, "but we choose how we climb it." The memory struck him with such force that he closed his eyes. When they resumed walking, Daniel deliberately slowed his pace to match Christina's. No rushing, no unnecessary conversation. Just quiet companionship. As they approached the apartment building, Noah suddenly stopped. "I need to tell you something." Christina smiled. "That's usually dangerous." He ignored the joke. "I talked to Mrs. Alvarez today." Mrs. Alvarez directed the after-school community center. "What about?" "I asked if I could stop going after school." Christina froze. "What?" "I could come home earlier." "So, you wouldn't have to hurry from work." Her smile disappeared. "Noah?" "I could stay here alone?" "No." "I'm old enough." "No." "I don't want you getting hurt because of me." Christina knelt despite the pain in her shoulder. She placed both hands gently on his face. "Listen to me." He nodded reluctantly. "You are not the reason my shoulders hurt." Tears gathered in his eyes. "You promise?" "I promise. But I am the reason you carry so much." She took a long breath. "No." She looked directly into his eyes. "You are the reason I keep going." Neither of them noticed Daniel quietly step farther away to give them privacy. But he heard enough to understand that this family wasn't asking for rescue. They were asking for a fair chance. Later that night, after Christina and Noah disappeared inside, Daniel didn't drive home immediately. Instead, he parked beneath a streetlight and opened his laptop for the first time in weeks outside his office. He searched city transportation records, accessible shuttle contracts, maintenance reports, public complaints. One document led to another. Within an hour, a disturbing pattern emerged. Dozens of complaints had been filed from neighborhoods like Christina's. Most had been marked with the same status: closed. No action required. Daniel frowned. He searched further. Then something made him sit upright. The company responsible for maintaining several accessibility improvements across this district wasn't just another contractor. Years earlier, Whitmore Urban Development had designed the original neighborhood improvement proposal. The accessibility features additional ramps, safer walkways. Improved bus access had been removed during budget revisions before construction began. Approved, signed, completed. Daniel stared at the digital signature authorizing the final revision. It was his own. He leaned back slowly, unable to take his eyes off the screen. For years, he had believed he had simply overlooked one struggling family. Now he realized something far more painful. Without ever intending to, he had helped build the very obstacles Christina climbed every single night. Daniel Whitmore barely slept. The digital files remained open on his laptop until nearly 3 in the morning. Every page seemed to accuse him in a different way. Budget adjustment, accessibility reduction, deferred infrastructure, cost optimization. The language was clean, professional, harmless. Yet buried beneath those polished phrases were real streets, real staircases, and real families who paid the price every day. Daniel closed the laptop only when the sunrise began to wash pale orange light across the city. For the first time in years, he canceled every meeting before breakfast. His executive assistant sounded alarmed. "The board review starts at 9. It will start without me. The mayor's office confirmed lunch. Reschedule it. You've never postponed both on the same day." Daniel looked out his office window. Then today is a first. By 10 o'clock, he was no longer wearing an expensive suit. Instead, he had changed into dark jeans, work boots, and a simple navy jacket. Sophia Reed met him in the parking garage carrying a rolled-up neighborhood survey map. She looked at him with curiosity. "I've never seen you skip a board meeting." "I've skipped something more important for years." She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she climbed into the passenger seat. Their first stop was the staircase Christina climbed every night. Standing there in daylight made everything even clearer. The concrete had cracked so badly that weeds pushed through several steps. The handrail ended halfway up. Rainwater had carved narrow channels along the edges. Sophia slowly climbed to the top before walking back down. If someone slipped here in winter... She stopped herself. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Daniel looked towards the apartment buildings surrounding the staircase. Children played basketball in a small parking lot. An elderly man carefully descended the steps, one hand at a time. A young mother struggled to push a stroller over broken pavement before giving up and lifting it herself. Daniel noticed something that architectural drawings had never shown. People had created their own paths. Worn trails crossed patches of grass where sidewalks failed. Wooden boards covered muddy sections. Someone had placed loose bricks over puddles to make stepping stones. Communities, he realized, quietly repaired what systems ignored. He took several photographs. Not for publicity, for memory. "I approved removing the replacement handrails," he admitted quietly. Sophia turned toward him. "What?" "It saved $84,000. She looked back at the staircase. $84,000. He nodded. "I remember thinking it was responsible." Neither spoke for several moments. They continued walking through the neighborhood. Everywhere Daniel looked, he saw invisible compromises. A bus stop with no bench, a curb without a ramp, sidewalk panels tilted upward by old tree roots, street crossings where wheelchair users would have to roll into traffic because the curb cuts had never been finished. Then they reached the corner where Route 51 made its final stop. Marcus Bell was beginning his afternoon shift. He recognized Daniel immediately. "Well, look who's riding my route without the bus." Daniel smiled. "I was hoping to ask you something." Marcus leaned comfortably against the bus. "Shoot." "How long have you driven this neighborhood?" 23 years. "Has it always been like this?" Marcus laughed without humor. "No. Worse. In some ways." He pointed toward the narrow sidewalk. "See that corner?" Daniel nodded. "There used to be a bench." "What happened?" "Taken out during road work." "Never replaced," Marcus shrugged. "They said not enough people used it." Daniel looked around. "I imagine plenty of people did." Marcus smiled sadly. "The folks making decisions usually drive." Daniel absorbed the sentence in silence. People who drove measured distance differently than people who walked. People who walked measured every hill, every broken curb, every missing handrail. Before leaving, Daniel thanked Marcus. The driver stopped him with one last thought. "You know what surprises me?" "What?" "It's never the people with the least who complain the loudest." Daniel looked towards the neighborhood. "No. They're usually too busy getting through the day." That sentence followed Daniel for the rest of the afternoon. Around 2 o'clock, he and Sophia visited the city planning archive. Old project drawings covered a long conference table. Sophia compared the original blueprints with the version ultimately approved. Her expression slowly changed from curiosity to disbelief. "Daniel," he already knew. "The first design included ramps on every block." He nodded. "There were shaded bus shelters." Another nod. "2 rest areas." "Yes." "A community shuttle loading zone." He closed his eyes briefly. It all disappeared. Sophia turned another page. "No." She pointed to the margin. It didn't disappear. He looked closer. Every deleted feature carried the same notation. Value engineering revision. She looked directly at him. They called accessibility a luxury. Daniel said nothing. He remembered signing dozens of revisions that year. He had trusted spreadsheets more than sidewalks. Outside the archive building, they stood quietly beneath the afternoon sky. Sophia finally broke the silence. "What are you going to do?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Put it back. It won't be easy. I didn't ask if it would be. The board will fight you. I know. The investors, too. I know." She smiled slightly. "Then I guess we'd better prepare." Late that afternoon, Daniel returned to the neighborhood alone. He parked a block away from Christina's apartment and simply watched. Not the buildings, the people. An elderly woman resting halfway up the stairs. A delivery driver carrying heavy boxes because his cart couldn't manage the broken pavement. 2 teenagers helping a man in a wheelchair around an impossible curb. Nobody treated these acts as extraordinary. They had become routine. Routine kindness filling the spaces where good design should have existed. As dusk settled over Pittsburgh, Daniel walked slowly toward the staircase once more. At the bottom, he noticed something he had missed every previous evening. On the side of the cracked handrail, someone had carved a small sentence into the weathered paint. Not professionally, just carefully. It read, "We carry each other." He ran his fingers gently across the faded letters. He didn't know who had written them. Perhaps a teenager. Perhaps an exhausted parent. Perhaps someone who had long since moved away. It didn't matter. The neighborhood had been telling its story all along. No one with enough influence had bothered to listen. Daniel looked up toward the top of the hill where Christina would soon appear after another shift. For the first time since building his company, he understood that architecture was never just about concrete steel or budgets. Every design decision became part of someone's ordinary Tuesday. A mother either carried her son another mile, or she didn't have to. And this time, Daniel refused to let another revision erase the people living between the lines of a blueprint. The following Monday, the executive boardroom at Whitmore Urban Development felt colder than usual. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Pittsburgh, where morning traffic flowed across the bridges like clockwork. Around the polished walnut table sat 12 executives each, with a leather folder neatly arranged before them. Ryan Collins noticed something unusual the moment Daniel entered. There were no quarterly reports in his hands, no financial projections. Instead, he carried a worn manila folder and a rolled neighborhood map. Daniel waited until everyone had taken their seats. "Good morning." A chorus of greetings answered him. He remained standing. "I've called this meeting because we're changing the Jefferson Heights redevelopment project." Ryan frowned. "The project has already been approved." "I know." "The city signed off." "I know." "The investors signed off." "I know." Ryan folded his hands. "Then what exactly are we discussing?" Daniel unrolled the map across the center of the table. Colored markers covered nearly every block. Red circles, blue lines, yellow notes written in the margins. "This," Daniel said quietly, "is what we've failed to see." Several executives leaned forward. Ryan barely glanced at the map. "Accessibility improvements?" Daniel nodded. "They were removed years ago." "For budget reasons?" "For accounting reasons." Ryan corrected him immediately. "The two are connected." Daniel looked around the room. "They shouldn't be." A brief silence followed. Sophia Reed distributed photographs taken during last week's neighborhood survey. Cracked staircases, broken sidewalks, bus stops without benches, parents carrying strollers, an elderly man struggling down uneven steps. None of the photographs looked dramatic. That was precisely what made them powerful. They showed ordinary hardship. Ryan flipped through the pages quickly. "I understand the emotional concern." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. This isn't about emotion. No. It's about responsibility. Ryan leaned back. With respect, Daniel, our company fulfilled every legal requirement. Legal isn't always right. Another executive cleared her throat. What exactly are you proposing? Daniel pointed to the revised map. We restore every accessibility feature originally removed, Sophia continued. That includes ramps, continuous sidewalks, safer crossings, covered bus stops, handrails, resting benches, improved lighting, and accessible loading areas. Someone quietly calculated numbers on a tablet. Estimated cost? Sophia looked toward Daniel. He answered himself. $24 million. The room became perfectly still. Ryan spoke first. And expected financial return? Daniel didn't hesitate. None. Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Ryan exhaled slowly. So we're discussing a $24 million expense with no measurable return. Daniel met his gaze. No measurable financial return. Ryan tapped the table gently. Our responsibility is to shareholders, Daniel answered calmly. Our responsibility is also to the communities where we build. Ryan's voice hardened. Communities don't invest in this company. No, Daniel nodded. They trust us. Ryan stood. I disagree. Daniel gestured toward him. Please. Ryan walked to the front of the room. For decades, we've built successful projects because we make disciplined decisions. He pointed toward the cost estimate. If we start redesigning every completed neighborhood because someone tells a compelling story, investors will lose confidence. Daniel listened without interrupting. Ryan continued. We cannot solve every social problem. No, Daniel answered quietly. But we shouldn't create them. The room fell silent again. Ryan looked directly at him. Is this about that woman? No one else knew who he meant. Daniel did. It started there. Ryan gave a small, frustrated laugh. So, one chance encounter changes company policy? Daniel slowly shook his head. No. He picked up one of the photographs. It reminded me to ask the right question. He placed the picture back on the table. The real question is how many families we've never met. Sophia looked around the room. I visited the neighborhood myself. Every eye turned toward her. Everything Mr. Whitmore has described is accurate. She pointed toward another photograph. Those stairs violate the intent of the original design. Ryan crossed his arms. But not current regulations. Sophia answered firmly. Sometimes regulations are simply outdated. Another executive spoke. If we approve this, will every previous project be challenged? Daniel nodded honestly. Possibly. And you're willing to risk that? Yes. The honesty surprised everyone. He wasn't pretending there would be no consequences. He was accepting them. Daniel opened the worn manila folder. Inside lay copies of the original planning documents. Near the bottom of one page was his own signature approving the revised budget. He placed the document where everyone could see it. I signed this. The room grew even quieter. I approved removing these improvements. Ryan remained silent. Daniel continued. I told myself I was protecting the company's future. He paused. I never asked whose future I was taking away. No one interrupted. For several seconds, only the faint hum of the building's ventilation system filled the room. Finally, one of the senior directors spoke. If we move forward, Daniel looked at her. What exactly are we trying to build? He smiled for the first time that morning. A city where no mother has to choose between keeping her job and carrying her child home. The sentence settled over the room with unexpected weight. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't marketing. It was specific. Human. Real. Ryan slowly sat down. He looked once more at the photographs before him. He still disagreed. The numbers hadn't changed. But something else had. The conversation was no longer about profit margins. It was about people whose lives had never appeared in quarterly reports. Daniel gathered the photographs into neat stacks. I'm not asking this company to become charitable. He looked around the table. I'm asking it to become accountable. The board chairman, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. Mr. Whitmore. Daniel turned. You understand this proposal may reduce earnings for several years. I do. And investors may question your leadership. They're free to. And if they vote against you, Daniel smiled gently, then I'll still know I finally voted for the right thing. The chairman studied him for a long moment. Then he slowly closed the project folder. We'll take the proposal to a formal vote next week. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. As the meeting adjourned, executives filed quietly from the room. Ryan lingered behind. You've changed. Daniel looked out the window toward the city, stretching beyond the glass. No, he answered softly. I think I'm finally remembering who I wanted to become. That evening, Daniel drove once again toward Belts Hoover. He carried no blueprints, no presentations, no speeches, only the familiar determination that had brought him there night after night. Far ahead, beneath the glow of a streetlight, he spotted Christina and Noah stepping off Marcus Bell's bus. Without hesitation, he picked up Noah's backpack before either of them had to ask. Neither of them knew a boardroom full of executives had spent the morning arguing about people just like them, and Daniel said nothing about it. Some promises he believed were better proven by actions than announced with words. Winter arrived quietly. The first snow of December dusted the rooftops of Belts Hoover before dawn, softening the cracks in sidewalks that everyone in the neighborhood knew were still there. From a distance, the streets looked peaceful. Up close, they were more dangerous than ever. Ice settled into broken concrete. Water froze on uneven steps. Every climb home demanded twice the caution. Christina zipped Noah's coat all the way to his chin before they left the apartment that morning. You warm enough? I'm wearing 3 shirts. You've worn more. I looked like a marshmallow. You were a very handsome marshmallow. Noah laughed, and for a few seconds the cold seemed less important. At St. Anne Medical Center, Emily Carter noticed Christina moving more carefully than usual. The shoulder, Christina nodded. And my knee. Emily frowned. You need time off. I need a paycheck. Emily couldn't argue with that. Instead, she quietly adjusted the evening schedule so Christina would spend fewer hours lifting heavy laundry carts. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Whitmore stood before a large presentation screen inside City Hall. Representatives from the Transportation Department, city engineers' neighborhood organizations, and members of the Whitmore Urban Development Team filled the room. Ryan Collins sat near the back, expression unreadable. Sophia Reed projected a revised neighborhood plan. No glossy renderings, no luxury apartments, no expensive retail spaces, only practical improvements, safe sidewalks, continuous ramps, handrails, rest benches every 300 feet, improved lighting, a redesigned bus stop connected directly to an accessible shuttle loading area. The room remained silent as she finished. One transportation official finally spoke. This isn't flashy. Daniel smiled. It isn't supposed to be. Another official flipped through the plans. Who requested all this? Daniel answered honestly. People who were tired of being overlooked. The official looked confused. I don't see any formal petition. There wasn't one. Then how do you know it's needed? Daniel paused. Because I walked the route. Several people looked up from their papers. You walked it. At night. In the rain. More than once. There was something about those simple words that changed the atmosphere. For years, decisions had been made from conference tables. Now someone was speaking from experience. The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours. Budgets were debated, construction schedules revised, permit requirements reviewed. Nothing happened quickly. Nothing happened magically. But before noon, the first phase received preliminary approval. It was only the beginning, yet it was real. That evening, Christina and Noah reached the final bus stop as usual. Marcus lowered the ramp with a grin. "I've got news." Christina smiled. "Good news? The best kind?" "What is it?" "They're surveying this whole route next week." "For what?" Marcus pointed toward the cracked sidewalk. "They're finally talking about fixing it." Christina looked around. "Really?" "That's what I heard." She smiled politely, but kept her expectations low. She had learned that promises often traveled faster than results. As they began walking, Daniel appeared from the familiar corner carrying Noah's backpack before anyone asked. "You've made that a habit," Christina teased. "I've been told habits can be useful." Noah laughed. "Especially good ones." Halfway up the hill, they noticed bright orange flags planted along sections of the sidewalk. Survey markers. A city engineering truck sat nearby. 2 workers measured the width of the staircase, while another photographed damaged concrete. One of the workers nodded politely. "Evening." Christina nodded back, confused. After they passed, Noah whispered, "Do you think they're really fixing it?" Christina looked ahead. "I don't know." Daniel said nothing. He wanted her to believe the neighborhood, not him. At the staircase, one of the engineers approached. "Ma'am," Christina stopped. "We're documenting accessibility issues." She nodded cautiously. "Would you mind answering one question?" "What kind?" "How often do you use these stairs?" She almost laughed. "Every day." "How many years?" She thought for a moment. "Almost 8. The engineer looked genuinely surprised. "And you carry your son every night?" "Most nights." He slowly wrote something on his clipboard. "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling us." Christina smiled faintly. "I've been telling people for years." The engineer lowered his eyes. I'm sorry we listened so late." When they reached the top of the hill, Noah looked back. The workers were still measuring every crack, every step, every broken handrail. "They're drawing the neighborhood," he said quietly. Daniel looked at him. "What do you mean?" "They're making a map." So maybe somebody finally wants people to find their way home." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. A week later, temporary construction signs appeared. Then safety barriers. The old handrail disappeared. Concrete crews arrived before sunrise. Residents gathered on porches watching with cautious curiosity. Helen Brooks folded her arms. "I've lived here 31 years. And I'll believe it when I can walk on it." Days passed, then weeks. New sidewalks slowly replaced broken ones. Fresh ramps connected corners that had always been separated. A covered bus shelter rose where passengers had stood in rain and snow for decades. A sturdy wooden bench was bolted beneath it. Marcus Bell parked his bus there on the first morning it opened. He sat on the bench during his break, smiling to himself. "It only took 23 years, he muttered. One evening, Christina stepped off the bus and stopped in disbelief. The accessible shuttle was waiting. Its driver stepped out holding a clipboard. "Christina Morris." "Yes." "We've restored your evening route." She stared at him. "There must be a mistake." "No, ma'am." He smiled warmly. "You're scheduled every weekday." She looked at Noah. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The driver lowered the ramp. "No rush." Christina helped Noah inside. Then she turned toward Daniel. "You knew." He smiled gently. "I hoped." She looked around the neighborhood. Children were already using the new sidewalks. An elderly man walked confidently along the fresh handrail. A woman pushed twins in a stroller without leaving the pavement. The city looked almost the same, yet everything important had changed. As the shuttle door closed, Noah rolled down the window. He waved enthusiastically at Daniel. "We're still going home," Daniel waved back. "Just taking an easier road." The shuttle drove away, climbing the hill Christina had conquered on aching shoulders for years. Daniel remained standing beside the new bus shelter. For the first time since meeting them, he watched them reach home without taking a single painful step on those broken stairs. He smiled, not because he had solved their lives, but because he had finally stopped making them harder. By early spring, the neighborhood no longer sounded the same. The sharp clatter of wheelchair wheels striking broken concrete had disappeared. Parents pushing strollers no longer stepped into the street to avoid shattered sidewalks. Elderly neighbors lingered on the new benches trading stories beneath the covered bus shelter while waiting for Route 51. The changes were not dramatic enough to make national headlines. They were something far more meaningful. They became part of everyday life. One Tuesday afternoon, Noah hurried through the apartment door, holding a large white envelope against his chest. "Mom," Christina looked up from the kitchen sink where she was washing dishes. "What happened?" "I got picked." "For what?" He handed her the envelope with trembling hands. Across the front, in bold blue letters, were the words, "Pittsburgh Young Innovators Art." Showcase. Christina carefully opened it. Inside was a letter inviting Noah to display one of his drawings at the city's annual youth exhibition. She looked at him. "You did this?" "No." He smiled nervously. "We did." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You've wanted this for so long." "I know." He hesitated. "But I don't know what to draw." Christina laughed softly. "Since when?" "I want it to matter." She placed the letter on the table. "It already does." That evening, Noah spread dozens of sketches across the folding table. Cities, stars, parks, bridges, bus stops. Daniel arrived just after dinner, as he often did now, though not every night. Sometimes they walked together. Sometimes he simply stopped by for a few minutes before heading home. The visits had become natural. Never scheduled, never expected, just welcomed. "What are we working on?" Daniel asked. Noah pointed toward the scattered papers. "My exhibition." Daniel picked up one drawing after another. Each was filled with careful details: wide sidewalks, accessible playgrounds, gardens beside walking paths, people of every age moving together. Finally, Daniel noticed one sketch that was only half finished. It showed a steep hill divided into two halves. On the left, cracked stairs climbed through darkness. On the right, a gently winding ramp curved beneath trees toward warm apartment windows. At the center stood a woman. On one side, she carried a child. On the other, they walked beside each other. Daniel stared at the page. "What does this one mean?" Noah answered quietly. "It's called The Day Home Got Closer." Daniel swallowed. "It's beautiful." "No." Noah shook his head. "It isn't finished." "What's missing?" "The people." "What people?" "The ones who stopped pretending they couldn't see." Daniel looked at Christina. She smiled knowingly. "He says buildings don't change cities." "What does brr?" "People deciding they matter." Daniel carefully returned the drawing to the table. "I think he's right." The weeks leading up to the exhibition passed quickly. Christina continued working at St. Anne Medical Center, but life had become noticeably different. Without the exhausting nightly climb, her shoulder slowly improved. She arrived at work with energy she hadn't felt in years. Emily Carter noticed first. "You're smiling before your coffee." Christina laughed. "I didn't realize. Do you even beat me here this morning?" "I had 15 extra minutes." Emily leaned against a laundry cart. "Funny how much life fits into 15 minutes." Christina nodded. "It feels like someone gave me part of my day back." Emily smiled. No. She looked thoughtfully towards the window. They gave you back time you already deserved. Across town, Daniel found himself visiting construction sites differently. Instead of asking how quickly projects could be completed, he asked questions his managers weren't accustomed to hearing. Can a grandmother rest here? Where would a child using crutches cross? What happens when it rains? At first, some engineers seemed confused. Soon they began asking those questions before he did. Culture, Daniel realized, changed one conversation at a time. The day of the exhibition finally arrived. The downtown convention center buzzed with families, teachers, artists, and reporters. Children stood proudly beside paintings, sculptures, and engineering models. Noah looked overwhelmed. I've never seen this many people. Christina squeezed his hand. They're here to see your work. No. He smiled shyly. They're here to see everybody's work. Daniel arrived quietly a few minutes before the opening ceremony. He wore no business badge, no company logo, only a simple navy blazer. He wanted to be there as Noah's friend, nothing more. When the curtain covering Noah's display was pulled aside, the room became unexpectedly quiet. His finished drawing stretched across an enormous canvas. The title read, "Every Road Leads Someone Home." The painting showed dozens of ordinary people. A bus driver lowering a ramp, an elderly neighbor carrying a backpack, construction workers repairing sidewalks, children helping one another, a mother no longer carrying her son because she no longer had to. There was one final figure standing near the edge of the painting, a man beside a parked black SUV. He wasn't in the center. He wasn't celebrated. He was simply walking. One reporter approached Noah. What inspired this? Noah thought carefully before answering. My mom taught me that strong people keep going. He smiled. And someone else taught me that strong people also stop. The reporter looked puzzled. What do you mean? When you stop long enough to notice someone. He glanced toward Christina. You can help them keep walking. The room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause slowly spread through the gallery. Christina wiped away a tear. Daniel looked at the painting once more. His eyes settled on the small blue knot painted onto the mother's left shoe. Tiny, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore once you saw it. He realized something then. Noah hadn't painted a story about being rescued. He had painted a story about being seen, and perhaps that was the deeper miracle. Not that one wealthy man had changed a neighborhood, but that an entire city had finally learned to notice the people it had walked past for far too long. As visitors continued gathering around the painting, a representative from the city's Department of Planning quietly approached Noah with a business card in her hand. She smiled. I think we should talk about your ideas. Noah looked up in surprise. He had come expecting to share a drawing. He had no idea that before the afternoon was over, someone would ask him to help imagine the future of an entire city. A week after the art exhibition, life returned to its familiar rhythm, but it no longer felt quite the same. The white envelope from the Pittsburgh Young Innovators Art Showcase remained tucked inside Noah's sketchbook, its edges already beginning to curl from being opened so many times. Every now and then, Christina caught him reading the invitation again. Not because he doubted it had happened, because he still couldn't believe it. One Wednesday afternoon, as Christina finished organizing fresh hospital linens, Emily Carter approached with another envelope. This one isn't from me, Emily said. It was delivered to the front desk. Christina wiped her hands before accepting it. Across the front was the logo of the Pittsburgh Community Mobility Partnership. She frowned. I've never heard of them. Maybe they heard of you. Inside was a letter inviting Christina to interview for a newly created position, Community Family Support Coordinator. She read the title twice, then a third time. Emily waited patiently. What does it say? They want to interview me. For what? Christina handed her the letter. Emily's eyes widened. They're building a support program for families caring for children with disabilities. Christina nodded slowly. I've never managed anything. Emily smiled. You've managed a life. That's different. Is it? Christina looked down at the paper. They're asking for someone with leadership experience. Emily laughed softly. You've been leading every single day. No. I just survive. Emily shook her head. You think survival doesn't teach leadership. Those words followed Christina throughout the rest of her shift. That evening she showed the letter to Noah while they ate homemade vegetable soup. His eyes grew enormous. You have to do it. I don't know. Why not? I've never worked in an office. So, I don't have a degree. So, I don't know how to help other families. Noah looked genuinely confused. You've been helping me my whole life. Before Christina could answer, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood outside carrying a paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. I brought cinnamon bread. You keep spoiling us, Christina teased. I was told sharing dessert isn't considered a crime. Noah immediately held up the letter. Mom got invited to an interview. Daniel read it carefully, then looked at Christina. Congratulations. I haven't earned congratulations yet. You earned the invitation. She sighed. I don't think I'm the person they're looking for. Daniel sat quietly for a moment before speaking. When I started my company, Christina looked at him. I had never managed more than 3 construction workers. You still knew construction. I didn't know leadership? He smiled. I learned from listening. She remained unconvinced. I'll say the wrong thing. So will everyone. I'll make mistakes. So did I. I still don't belong there. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Christina. She met his eyes. Do you know what can't be taught in any university? She waited. Authenticity. He glanced toward Noah. You understand the families they'll be serving better than anyone reading applications. The room fell quiet. Helen Brooks knocked lightly before opening the apartment door a crack. I smelled cinnamon bread. Noah laughed. Come in. Helen accepted a slice before noticing the letter on the table. What's all this? Christina explained. Helen listened carefully. When the story ended, she looked almost offended. Why are we still discussing whether you'll go? Christina smiled nervously. Because I'm afraid. Helen nodded. Good. Good. The people who worry about serving others usually serve them best. 3 days later, Christina walked into the interview, wearing the only navy blazer she owned. Emily had pressed it the night before. Helen had insisted on polishing her shoes. Daniel had quietly arranged nothing, intentionally. He wanted every success to belong entirely to her. The interview panel consisted of 4 people: a social worker, a pediatric therapist, a nonprofit director, and the city's accessibility coordinator. The first questions were predictable. Tell us about yourself. Describe a challenge you've overcome. Why are you interested in this position? Christina answered honestly. Sometimes awkwardly, never pretending to know more than she did. Halfway through, the nonprofit director asked a different question. If we hired you, Christina nodded. What would you change first? She paused, long enough that one interviewer assumed she was struggling. Instead, she smiled. I'd change how we greet parents. The panel looked surprised. What do you mean? Most parents of children with disabilities spend half their lives explaining themselves. The room grew quiet. The first question shouldn't be... She took a breath. What's wrong? What should it be? How can we make today easier? Nobody wrote anything for several seconds. The social worker finally broke the silence. "Where did you learn that?" Christina smiled softly. "From all the days nobody asked." When the interview ended, she walked outside, convinced she had failed. "I talked too much." She laughed nervously while calling Noah. "I forgot half the examples I wanted to give." Noah's voice came through the phone immediately. "Did you tell the truth?" "Yes." "Then you did fine." She smiled. "I wish I had your confidence." "You do?" "I do." "Nah. You just lend it to me most days." The call ended with both of them laughing. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This time, Christina hesitated before opening it. Her hands trembled slightly. Noah stood beside her. Helen watched from across the hallway. Daniel had stopped by to return one of Noah's books and quietly waited near the kitchen. Christina unfolded the letter. She read the first line, stopped, read it again, then covered her mouth. Noah couldn't wait any longer. "What does it say?" Tears finally escaped despite every effort to hold them back. She looked at her son. "I got the job." Noah shouted so loudly that Helen nearly dropped her teacup. Daniel smiled, but remained where he was. He didn't interrupt their embrace. Mother and son held each other for a long time. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Later that evening, after the excitement settled, Christina walked Daniel to the apartment entrance. "I still can't believe it." "You should." She looked toward the quiet street. "I'm afraid people will expect me to have all the answers." Daniel shook his head. "They won't need all the answers." "What will they need?" he smiled. "The same thing you gave me the first night we met." She looked puzzled. "I didn't give you anything." "Yes, you did." He glanced toward the hill below. "You reminded me that sometimes the most important person in the room," he paused, "is the one who's lived the problem." Christina stood silently as his words settled into her heart. For years she had believed the hardest chapters of her life were simply burdens she had been forced to carry. Now, for the first time, she began to wonder if they had also been preparing her to carry others. Christina's first month as Community Family Support Coordinator taught her something she had never expected. Almost every family she met began with the same sentence. "I'm sorry to bother you." Some apologized for asking questions. Some apologized for crying. Some apologized simply for needing help. Every time Christina gently interrupted them. "You don't have to apologize for carrying something heavy." The words spread quietly through the office. Soon, other staff members began saying them too. On Tuesday mornings, parents gathered around a large wooden table in the community center. There were fathers learning how to navigate insurance paperwork, grandparents raising grandchildren with disabilities, single mothers balancing 2 jobs, young couples overwhelmed by diagnoses they barely understood. Christina never pretended she had every solution. Instead, she listened, really listened. She remembered names, favorite snacks, children's birthdays, the medications that caused sleepless nights, the schools that returned phone calls, the bus drivers who waited an extra minute. People noticed. Not because her advice was extraordinary, because her attention was. One rainy afternoon, a young mother named Jasmine arrived carrying a restless little girl with muscular dystrophy. "I'm failing," Jasmine whispered before sitting down. Christina handed her a cup of tea. "What makes you think that?" "No. I lose my patience." "You came today." Jasmine nodded. "I almost stayed home." "But you didn't." Tears rolled down Jasmine's cheeks. "I don't feel strong." Christina smiled gently. "Neither did I." The room became quiet. "I thought strength meant never getting tired." She shook her head. "It doesn't." "What is it?" "Coming back tomorrow." Jasmine lowered her eyes. "I think I can do tomorrow." Christina reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's enough. Word spread through the city that the new coordinator understood families in a different way. She didn't speak from textbooks. She spoke from experience. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself visiting the community center more often than he admitted to anyone. Sometimes he dropped off donated art supplies, sometimes books. Sometimes he simply sat in the back during parent workshops listening, never introducing himself as a billionaire. Just another volunteer. One Friday evening, after everyone else had left, Christina found Daniel standing beside the window, overlooking the new, accessible park. Children laughed as they raced across smooth pathways. Wheelchairs rolled beside bicycles. Parents chatted on benches beneath young maple trees. The park looked ordinary. That was precisely what made it beautiful. "You've been quiet lately," Christina observed. Daniel smiled faintly. "I've been thinking." "About work?" "No." He looked toward the playground. "About Grace." Christina waited. She had heard the name only once before, months earlier. Never the full story. Daniel rested both hands on the windowsill. "My sister was 8. His voice remained steady, though softer than usual. She loved parks. He watched a little girl chase soap bubbles across the grass. But most parks weren't built for her. Christina remained silent. When we found one with a path wide enough for her wheelchair, he smiled sadly. She said it felt like someone had remembered she existed. A long pause followed. Daniel continued. "After she died, I promised I'd build places she would have loved. What happened?" He laughed quietly at himself. "I became successful. And I convinced myself success meant building bigger projects." He looked around the community center. "I forgot it was supposed to mean fewer people being left behind." Christina walked beside him. "You didn't forget forever." "No." He nodded. "But long enough." Outside, Noah sat beneath a tree sketching the playground. He looked older now, not because time had passed, because confidence had. Daniel watched him for a moment. "He reminds me of her. Grace. The way he sees things everyone else misses." Christina smiled. "He notices details." So did Grace. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I've carried something for years." He carefully unfolded an old photograph. The edges had faded. The colors were soft with age. It showed 2 children, a teenage boy standing behind a wheelchair, a smiling little girl wearing a bright blue sweater. Christina looked closely. Around Grace's left sneaker was a blue shoelace tied into an uneven knot. Her eyes widened. "The knot," Daniel nodded. "My mother replaced a broken lace with whatever she could find." He smiled gently. "Grace refused to change it." "Why?" She said blue meant hope. Christina felt a chill. "So did Noah." "I know." She looked toward the playground where Noah continued drawing. "I never taught him that. Neither did we." For a moment, neither spoke. Some symbols they realized seemed to find people exactly when they needed them. Daniel folded the photograph carefully. There was something else. Christina turned toward him. "The first night I saw you." He hesitated. "I wasn't staring at your shoes." "I know. I was staring at my childhood." His voice finally cracked. "I saw my mother carrying Grace up a staircase because there wasn't another way home." The confession hung quietly between them. "I thought becoming wealthy meant I'd escaped those memories." He shook his head. "It turns out they were waiting for me." Christina looked at him with extraordinary gentleness. "I need to tell you something, too." He waited. The hardest part wasn't carrying Noah. "No." She shook her head. "The hardest part was wondering how much longer I could." Daniel listened without interrupting. "Every night," She looked toward the hill beyond the park. I'd calculate how much taller he had grown. She smiled through tears. And every night I'd pray my body would stay one day stronger than his. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I never told him. You didn't have to. I was afraid. Of what? That one day I'd drop him. Silence settled around them. Children's laughter drifted through the open window. Life continued outside, while two old wounds quietly found room to breathe. Finally, Daniel spoke. You know what Noah taught me? She smiled. What? That cities aren't measured by skylines. He looked toward the accessible pathways winding through the park. They're measured by whether people can make it home. Christina nodded slowly. And you know what you taught me. What? Sometimes carrying someone isn't weakness. She glanced toward Noah. It's love. Just then, Noah looked up from his sketchbook. He waved excitedly toward them. I finished it. The drawing showed dozens of blue knots tied together across different paths throughout the city. Each knot connected one person to another. No single knot held the whole map together. Together they did. Daniel smiled. For the first time in decades, the promise he had made to Grace no longer felt broken. It had simply taken him a lifetime to find the road back to it. 8 years passed more quickly than any of them expected. The maple trees planted beside the new sidewalks had grown tall enough to cast generous shade across the neighborhood each summer. Children who had once learned to ride bicycles on the smooth paths were now preparing for college. The accessible bus shelter had become an ordinary part of the landscape, so ordinary that newcomers assumed it had always been there. Daniel often smiled at that thought. The greatest improvements, he believed, were the ones people eventually stopped noticing because they became normal. Christina Morris no longer worked from a small office inside the community center. She directed a citywide caregiver support network that connected hospitals, schools, transportation agencies, and nonprofit organizations. She spent her days helping families navigate systems that had once overwhelmed her. She never allowed anyone to call her inspirational. I'm just experienced, she would say, with a warm smile. Whenever a new parent entered her office carrying fear in their eyes, Christina greeted them exactly the same way she had on her first day. How can we make today easier? The sentence had become more than a welcome. It had become the culture of the entire organization. Emily Carter still worked at St. Anne Medical Center. Whenever they met for lunch, Emily teased Christina. I knew you'd leave the laundry room someday. Christina laughed. I didn't. I did? You always believed in me. Emily stirred her coffee thoughtfully. No? I simply believed what you couldn't see yet. Across town, Noah Morris was 22. The shy boy who once filled sketchbooks with imaginary sidewalks had become an urban accessibility designer. His office walls were covered with maps instead of paintings. Colored pins marked neighborhoods across Pennsylvania where new projects were underway. Unlike many designers, Noah insisted on walking every site himself, sometimes using a cane, sometimes a lightweight mobility aid, always paying attention to details others overlooked. He counted curb heights, measured handrail distances, timed traffic signals while crossing intersections. He spoke with parents pushing strollers, veterans using prosthetic legs, older adults carrying groceries. He believed expertise began with listening. Sophia Reed had become his closest professional partner. She often laughed that Noah could identify a poorly designed sidewalk from half a block away. I don't look for mistakes, he corrected gently. I look for people. One autumn afternoon, Sophia spread blueprints across a large conference table. The city approved another neighborhood redesign. Noah studied the plans. How many schools? 3. Bus stops? 9. He smiled. We'll need more benches. Sophia laughed. I knew you were going to say that. People need places to rest. They also need places to talk. He nodded. Sometimes they're the same place. Daniel, now 66, had gradually stepped away from daily corporate operations. He still served as chairman, but younger leaders handled most decisions. Ryan Collins had retired 2 years earlier. Before leaving, he surprised everyone by requesting one final meeting with Daniel. I was wrong, Ryan admitted quietly. Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. About what? I thought accessibility was an expense. He smiled with a hint of embarrassment. It turned out to be an investment. Daniel waited. Our neighborhoods have higher occupancy. Local businesses are stronger. Families stay longer. Ryan shook his head. I spent years measuring the wrong numbers. Daniel extended his hand. We both learned. Not every lesson needed a winner. Some simply needed honesty. That same afternoon, Daniel visited Christina's office carrying a familiar cardboard box. She recognized it immediately. You still have it. I thought someone else should. Together they opened the box. Inside rested the old pair of faded sneakers. The soles had long since worn smooth. The fabric had faded from black to charcoal gray, but the blue knot remained exactly as it had years earlier. Christina gently lifted one shoe into her hands. I can't believe you kept them, Daniel smiled. I asked the construction crew to save them after you finally agreed to buy a new pair. She laughed. I remember feeling guilty. You deserved new shoes long before that. She carefully traced the faded blue cord with her fingertips. So much happened because of this little knot. Daniel shook his head. No. He looked toward the busy hallway where families came and went throughout the day. So much happened because you refused to stop walking. A soft knock interrupted them. Noah stepped inside carrying a large presentation tube over one shoulder. I've got something to show both of you. He spread a new city master plan across Christina's conference table. Greenways connected neighborhoods. Accessible walking routes linked schools, parks, hospitals, libraries, and transit centers. Every route included shaded seating lighting and continuous ramps. Daniel studied the design carefully. You remembered everything. Noah smiled. I remembered everyone. Christina looked at one corner of the blueprint. What does this symbol mean? A small blue knot appeared beside several community centers. Noah's smile widened. It's something new. What is it? Every project will include a caregiver rest station. Daniel looked up. A place to sit. No. A place to breathe. He pointed toward the symbol. Water. Charging outlets. Medical supplies. Information. A quiet room. Christina's eyes filled with tears. The kind of place you never had. The kind of place nobody should have to wish for. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Grace had once imagined cities where everyone could reach the playground. Now Noah was designing cities where caregivers could finally rest without feeling invisible. Dreams, Daniel realized, sometimes survived by finding new dreamers. Before leaving the office, Christina placed the old sneakers inside a glass display case near the entrance. Visitors often paused to read the small plaque beneath them. It did not mention wealth. It did not mention awards. It did not mention companies. It simply read, "Every journey becomes lighter when someone chooses to walk beside you." Throughout the following weeks, families entering the building frequently stopped in front of the display. Children asked why the shoelace was blue. Parents smiled while telling their own stories. The little knot became more than a memory. It became a reminder that extraordinary change often began with something so small most people would have walked past without seeing it. And every time Daniel visited the office, he glanced at the display before greeting anyone else. Not because it reminded him of success, because it reminded him of the evening he finally stopped driving long enough to notice the road beneath someone else's feet. On a warm Saturday morning in late May, People began gathering long before the ceremony was scheduled to start. Families unfolded lawn chairs beneath newly planted oak trees. Children chased one another along smooth walking paths. Volunteers handed out bottles of water, while a local high school jazz band tuned their instruments near the stage. 8 years earlier, the same hill had been known for its broken stairs and dangerous sidewalks. Today it was opening as Pittsburgh's newest accessible community corridor. A bronze sign stood beneath a blue ribbon still covered by a navy cloth. Reporters wandered through the crowd looking for interviews. City officials rehearsed speeches. Photographers adjusted their cameras. Christina Morris stood quietly away from the stage, watching parents arrive with children using wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, and adaptive bicycles. Nobody struggled to reach the park. Nobody searched for an alternate entrance. Everyone simply came in together. She smiled. That was the entire point. Daniel Whitmore walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might forget breakfast." She accepted one gratefully. Old habits. They're not all bad. For a moment, they simply watched the families filling the park. "I've been thinking," Christina said softly. "That usually means I'm about to learn something." She laughed. "When we first met, I thought you stopped because you felt sorry for me. And now? I know you stopped because you remembered someone." Daniel looked toward the sky before answering. "I remembered Grace." He paused. "But I stayed because I met Christina and Noah." A few yards away, Noah adjusted the display boards, presenting the design history of the project. Now 22, he moved with calm confidence as volunteers asked him questions about the accessibility features he had designed. One little boy using forearm crutches pointed toward a wide pathway. "Did you make that?" Noah smiled. "I helped." "Why is it so wide?" "So nobody has to choose who goes first." The boy nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Perhaps it did. Mayor Evelyn Porter stepped onto the stage and welcomed the crowd. She spoke about community partnerships, thoughtful planning, and neighborhoods that belonged to everyone. Then she surprised the audience. Many people suggested naming this corridor after generous donors or public officials. She smiled toward Daniel. One person refused every suggestion. The audience applauded as Daniel shook his head with quiet embarrassment. The mayor continued. Instead, he asked us to remember the people whose quiet perseverance inspired this project. She reached toward the covered bronze plaque. "When you uncover this sign today, you'll understand why." Christina felt Noah gently squeeze her hand. Together with Daniel, they stepped forward. The cloth slipped away. The bronze inscription caught the morning sunlight. "The Holding Not Walk," dedicated to every caregiver who kept going, and to every neighbor who chose to walk beside them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud at first. It grew slowly, warmly, until the entire park echoed with it. Christina looked down, overwhelmed. Noah quietly reached into the canvas bag hanging from his shoulder. "I brought something." He carefully lifted a small wooden box. Daniel recognized it immediately. The shoes? Christina slowly opened the lid. Inside rested the faded sneakers she had worn through countless nights. The fabric had aged even more. The soles were worn smooth, but the blue knot remained exactly as it had years before. Noah gently picked up the left shoe. "You carried me in these." Christina smiled through tears. "I did." He looked around at the crowd. "Today." He carefully placed the shoe back inside the box. "I get to carry them." He lifted the wooden box himself and walked toward the community center overlooking the new park. Everyone instinctively stepped aside, giving him space. Inside the entrance hall stood the familiar glass display case prepared months earlier. Noah opened it. He placed the shoes inside, with both hands taking care that the blue knot faced forward. A small plaque rested beneath them. It read, "As long as the knot holds, so do we." Below it another line had been added. "Sometimes the knot is hope. Sometimes it is courage. Most often it is another person who refuses to leave." People stood quietly, reading the words. Helen Brooks, now moving more slowly, but still smiling as brightly as ever, wiped away a tear. Marcus Bell, recently retired after 31 years behind the wheel of Route 51, tipped his cap toward Christina. Emily Carter embraced several former co-workers who had come to celebrate. None of them spoke about miracles, because they knew the truth. Nothing about this story had happened overnight. It had taken years, thousands of ordinary decisions, one conversation after another, one sidewalk, one handrail, one bus stop, one family, one friend. As the afternoon sun settled over the park, children filled the pathways with laughter. Parents rested on shaded benches without worrying how they would make it home. Wheelchairs rolled beside bicycles. Strollers moved beside walkers. Nobody stood out. Everyone belonged. Daniel watched the scene quietly. Christina joined him. "You know," she said, "I still have days when life feels heavy." He nodded. "So do I." She smiled. "The difference is—" She looked across the park toward Noah, helping another young designer examine a city map. "Now I know I don't have to carry everything alone." Daniel followed her gaze. "And neither does this city." The blue ribbon from the ceremony fluttered gently in the afternoon breeze. For the first time in many years, Daniel thought about Grace without feeling regret. Instead, he imagined her smiling somewhere beyond the trees, watching children travel roads she would have loved. Some promises are fulfilled not in a single moment, but through thousands of quiet acts of kindness. The first one had begun with a simple question asked beside a rainy street. "May I walk with you?" Everything else had simply been the answer. Life rarely changes because one extraordinary person appears and fixes every problem. More often it changes because ordinary people refuse to ignore one another. Christina never asked to be rescued. She only wanted the chance to work, love her son, and return home with dignity. Daniel discovered that generosity is not measured by the size of a donation, but by the willingness to stay long enough to understand someone else's burden. Noah reminded everyone that the best cities are not the tallest or the richest. They are the ones where every person can find a safe way home. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people you pass every day. Someone may be carrying a weight you cannot see. A kind word, a few minutes of your time, or simply choosing to notice them could become the turning point in their life. Kindness does not always require great wealth. It begins with paying attention. If you enjoyed this journey, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. If you know someone who could use a reminder that hope often arrives one quiet step at a time, please share this story with them. And if you'd like more heartfelt stories about courage, compassion, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join us on the next journey.